Okay, so now that we've set up the timing of bedtime and gotten kids comfortable with the bedroom, we're going to take a look at those routines themselves. And many studies have shown that bedtime routines are highly effective. So we'll just highlight a couple here. According to a study by Mindell in 2009, when used by itself without any other interventions, children who received 3 weeks of a nightly bedtime routine fell asleep significantly faster and had fewer and shorter overnight wake-ups. And then in another study by Mindell et al. In 2015, they had over 10,000 children ages 0 through 5, and they found that having a bedtime routine, which they defined as 3 or more nights per week, was associated with many positive sleep outcomes, including earlier bedtimes, shorter sleep onset latency, reduced night wakings, and increased sleep duration. And then another interesting outcome of that study is that the relationship between the bedtime routine and sleep outcomes was dose dependent. So meaning that the more nights per week the routine was implemented, the better the sleep outcomes were. So bedtime routines themselves have definitely been shown to be effective. So now we want to look at what should be in the routine to make it work. Mindell and Williamson in 2018 did a review of a variety of studies, and they wanted to find the characteristics of a successful routine. They defined a bedtime routine as the predictable activities that occur in the hour or so before lights out and before the child falls asleep. So the key word they used here is predictable. So we want the activities to occur in the same order every night and end with that same consistent signal for sleep. So maybe tucking the child in a certain way or saying, I love you, and then turning out the light in that same order every night. So over time, this consistency in the routine allows the brain to predict when sleep should occur and really release those appropriate hormones to make it happen. So this study talked about several effective bedtime routines for ages 0 through 5. One routine was a 30-minute, 3-step routine that included bathing, lotioning, and quiet activities such as cuddling or reading. And caregivers in this bedtime routine condition reported significant improvements in both sleep latency and night wakings. And they also looked at a study where parents in the bedtime routine condition were just asked to engage in 4 to 7 quiet activities for 20 minutes prior to bedtime. But the parents weren't told what activities. They could just pick their own. And these children also showed significant decreases in bedtime tantrums relative to that control condition. So the takeaway here is that the bedtime routine really doesn't have to be any specific activities. As long as they're calm, quiet activities, and they occur predictably in that same order every night, it can be effective. But there are some things that have been shown to make the bedtime routine even more beneficial, which are incorporating language-based activities, massage, and music. So in one study, Hale 2011, they looked at using a language-based bedtime routine, which includes things like reading, storytelling, or singing. And they had a large sample of over 4,000 children. And they found that having a language-based bedtime routine at 3 years old predicted an increase in the duration of nighttime sleep at 5 years old. And then in another study by Field, 23 infants and toddlers with problems falling asleep were assigned to either nightly 15-minute massages from their parents or to reading a bedtime story. And parents in both these groups were asked to do these activities as that last step of their child's typical bedtime routine. And after 1 month of the intervention, the children in the massage group had less bedtime resistance and shorter sleep onset latencies than the children in the bedtime story group. So taking both of those studies together, it seems like both the stories and the massage are beneficial, but having the massage be that last step in the routine is probably going to be more effective. And then lastly was another study by Field that looked at nap time instead of bedtime. But they found that on days where background classical guitar music was played for toddlers and preschoolers at nap time, the children fell asleep faster than on days where no music was played. So playing some calm, gentle music could also be something to suggest adding into the bedtime routine. Then when talking about bedtime routines, there's some modifications that we may want to consider if we are working with children diagnosed with ASD. So first, we'll want to look at the length of the bedtime routine. So while some children will be okay with that recommended routine of about an hour, for some children, that routine is going to be too long, and they might become overstimulated or too ritualized with it. And then for other children that have difficulty with settling their bodies down, they may need an even longer routine. Another consideration is going to be the activities that go into the routine. So if the child does have minimal leisure skills, a lot of times it's difficult for parents to really come up with activities to make the bedtime routine last long enough. So we want to let them know that it's perfectly okay to include activities like dinner or maybe an extra long bath time in the routine, as long as it doesn't make the learner too overstimulated, while we do work on introducing some new leisure skills. And then if it's appropriate for the child, it can also help to give families a visual schedule of the bedtime routine, which not only helps the learner know what to expect next, but can also help keep families consistent with the routine as well. And then lastly, some learners will increase cooperation with the routine if they're given choices. So again, we want to keep the order of the activities consistent, but we can still incorporate choices. So maybe it's always time to read books at a certain time, but we can ask, do they want to read Goodnight Moon or Llama Llama? Then it's also going to be important to think about the activities that are not beneficial to sleep, which Mindell and Williamson called maladaptive activities. So these maladaptive activities include any activities that occur right as the child is falling asleep, such as rocking or feeding. These activities should occur earlier in the routine before the lights are turned out, because doing them right as the child is falling asleep can create those sleep associations, which can then cause the child to wake up in the middle of the night looking for those activities to occur again. And we covered those in more detail in our first CEU if you want some more information on that. Then other maladaptive activities are activities that cause excessive stimulation. So things like using electronics and running around within about an hour of bedtime. So we'll look at those now. When it comes to screen time, researchers used to think that it was the blue light in screens that was suppressing melatonin and making it more difficult to fall asleep. But newer research has found that the effect of blue light itself isn't as significant as they thought, and they're instead now focusing on the behavioral effects of screen time. So Baduko and Serena studied this recently, and they found that screen time before bed can interfere with winding down and push bedtimes later. And then also, if screens are left on during the night, that can lead to disrupted sleep patterns. And they found that the negative impacts of screen time are particularly strong in individuals that have poor self-regulation skills and who engage in more risk-taking behaviors. And these researchers also found that certain features of the technology have a large impact on sleep. So using technology in a more engaging way, like video gaming or scrolling, is going to delay bedtime much more than just watching television. And then they also cautioned against the continuous play features, like on YouTube, where another video automatically comes on, which is going to delay sleep even more. So the takeaway for our kids here is that it's really okay to incorporate a calm show that has a discrete beginning and ending into the bedtime routine, especially if that helps the learner settle down. But we really want to avoid more of that up-close active screen time close to bed. Another activity that's really popular in bedtime routines, but can actually interfere with sleep, is running around and getting the wiggles out. So many people think that this will tire kids out, And doing physical activity earlier in the day is so great for sleep. But if we do it too close to bedtime, it typically has that opposite effect. A newer study by Leota found that engaging in vigorous exercise within 2 hours of bedtime resulted in a 36-minute later sleep onset. And most of these studies look at exercising in adults, but we can extend these movements to things that kids usually do, like running around, jumping, or roughhousing. And the reason for this is likely that exercise increases our core temperature, and it's important that core temperature decreases at night to signal that it's time to sleep. And then another reason that exercise delays sleep is that it increases our focus at a time that we need to be decreasing our focus in order to fall asleep. Another consideration we want to think about are transitions and reinforcers.